All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, last week when I was listening to Joe Rogan's interview with Edward Snowden, I was struck in particular by this quote: "We are forced today to live naked before power." What's the worst or most embarrassing thing you've ever said or done in your life? The worst thing you've texted or comment you've made? Really take a second to think about it. Now imagine that thing being weaponized by your enemies to destroy your person, your life, your career, to humiliate you and put your most intimate and private moments into the forever public square. I've been watching what's been done to Katie Hill with absolute horror. Hill stands accused of having a consensual relationship with a staffer. Poor judgment, absolutely, especially when you're the boss. Obviously, there's a power dynamic at play. That is not okay. But let's be honest, that is not the reason Congresswoman Hill resigned. No. Katie Hill resigned because a bunch of moralizing, hypocritical, and potentially criminal smear artists decided to rip her clothes off in the public square by posting nude photos without her consent. Let's be real, people. It is cancel culture gone completely wild. She was humiliated and shamed out of office as part of an intentional campaign of abuse. There was no public service value in this. This wasn't about power dynamics in the workplace. It wasn't necessary or journalistic. It was cruel, dehumanizing, disgusting, and awful. Doing violence not only to Ms. Hill, but to the millions of women and plenty of men out there, too, who have nudes or a kink or a non-conventional relationship or an asshole abusive ex who's seeking vengeance. They've now been put on notice that daring to step into public life means risking being subjected to a collective national shaming. We also just learned that apparently GOP operatives had over 700 revenge porn pics just ready to go to drop one by one to a leering audience to be passed around and debated. Maybe this week it's boobs, next week ass, next week actual sex. I can't say she shouldn't have resigned. What would you do? I think I'd probably resign too, even though it means letting the cruelty win. I just don't think I could withstand that kind of psychological torture and remain remotely intact, not to mention what it would mean for the young staffers who have, of course, been dragged into all of this. I know the tiniest bit of what this all feels like. Most of you probably already know this, but for those who don't, I was a bit of a trailblazer in the field of salacious photos released without consent. When I ran for Congress at the age of 28, a blogger posted party photos of me fully clothed and of age, goofing around with sex toys. The whole episode honestly feels incredibly quaint now, but for a brief moment, I was one of the most Googled people in the world, and every news outlet, from the junk to the staid networks, used it as an excuse to publish those photos and ask whether this was conduct fitting of a potential member of Congress. Here I am having a great time talking about these dumb photos in my very first TV interview ever. Funny enough, it was with Ryan Nobles, who's now at CNN. I think this is incredibly sexist. I think it's outrageous. I think it's exactly the sort of thing that voters are extremely frustrated with. You know, today, we launched our radio ads actually challenging my opponent to debate on the issues. And that's what Virginians want to hear about. You know, how are we going to get people back to work? How are we going to make sure we have the #1 education system in the world? How are we going to make sure we have roads that allow people to get to and from work on time? I mean, those are the things that Virginians care about. And the fact that they've dug up these old pictures of me in a Halloween costume, it's sexist and it's wrong. After I gathered my thoughts, I also wrote an op-ed for the Huffington Post about the bullshit idea that women cannot be both powerful and sexual. Here in part is what I said about why I decided to fight back rather than take the advice of my consultants and try to hide my head until the storm blew over. Quote, "I realized that photos like the ones of me, and ones much racier, would end up coming into the public sphere when women of my generation run for office. And I knew that there could be no other answer to the question than this. Society has to accept that women of my generation have sexual lives that are going to leak into the public sphere. Sooner or later, this is a reality that has to be faced, or many young women in my generation will not be able to run for office." Well, here we are. Look, I understand why some of my friends on the left have supported Hill's resignation. Katie Hill is certainly far from perfect, and sexual relationships, even consensual ones, with junior staffers are inappropriate and potentially an abuse of power. But let's not pretend that her resignation actually has anything to do with an affair. Just like the release of my photos, it has everything to do with partisan power grabbing and shame. No revenge porn, no resignation. That is the bottom line. And it sure would be nice to see our historic first woman speaker say something in support of all of us women out there with nudes. To my friends on the right, Katie Hill's national shaming is as much an example of an out-of-control cancel culture as anything that we've seen, complete with moral panic and faux outrage from people who don't care one bit about consent and power dynamics in the workplace. You may delight in seeing Katie Hill brought low, But do you really want to live by the standards being set by this example, where any sexual or Me Too infraction, no matter how small, can be used as justification for ritualistic humiliation, which will exist on the internet forever? So allow me to say loud and clear, I'm a woman, I've certainly made mistakes, and I stand with Katie. All of the faux puritanical moralizers can take a seat. And Sagar, we also learned that the quote-unquote journalist who initially posted these photos is actually working with and directly supporting Katie's Republican challenger.
She had supported her challenger, that's right. I mean, this is we talked about this yesterday. I follow a little bit differently. I mean, the rules of the House Ethics Committee put in after the Me Too era was that you cannot have a relationship with a staffer, that in alone is enough for you to go. It was clear based on the text messages that were published, both by the Daily Mail and by Red State, that she was having a relationship with a staffer, was manipulating. I mean, it was very an emotionally manipulative relationship. It's a 22-year-old girl. She was paying her thousands and thousands of dollars. And I agree with you. The Daily Mail and Red State should never have published these photos.
Yeah.
It normalizes a political attack behavior. I even agree that she probably wouldn't have resigned if just the text had come out. There would have been. So it is a weaponization of people's most private relationships. And actually, I hope this gets sorted out in the courts, because we actually need to find out as a society if we're okay with something like this. Because you're right when you point out to the right, which is that these, so many of the people were moralizing and attacking her. It was obviously in bad faith.
Right.
And
they don't care about consent in the workplace.
No, and not even that. You know what? I feel bad for her. She clearly has some substance abuse issues and some other things going on in her life. And so, having this all dropped on her at that time, that's terrible. So, but like I said, I think that the rules as they stand are actually good rules. It's a good thing that these things are not allowed.
But you can think both things, right? Like, I don't think it was okay that she had that relationship either. Now, I mean, I think there's a separate question of exactly how that all plays out when it's a woman versus a man and all of those dynamics. But you're absolutely right. It is not okay to have a relationship with a junior staffer. But ask yourself the question: if it wasn't for the photos, would she still be a member of Congress? And that's what really was happening here. And the fact that they had all this other stuff hanging out over her head, no one can live like that. No one can live that. But the reality is we are all living like that. We are all one leak, one abusive ex, one whatever away from having all our stuff published out there as well.
Absolutely. And you know what? We should take this opportunity as remember, I think there's 250 sealed sexual harassment settlements that have happened in the House of Representatives. Unseal all of them.
Right.
Let's find out what all these other guys are up to. How many of these junior staffers have they slept with? Secretaries, whatever.
How many of these members of Congress, these guys out there, are sleeping with their staffers?
Right. I want to know.
How many?
Right. And
I mean, I guarantee you it's quite a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Let's unseal these documents. Let's get every single one of these things out there. Back in, I think, during the height of the Me Too era, the Washington Post was talking about, everybody in town knew somebody was working on a story or whatever. It never actually came out. And I'm still waiting, because a lot of these people, very abusive people who have used their power to against people that they employ, that all needs to come out into the public square. So if Katie Hill's going to go, everybody else should too.
Should have to go.
That has done the same thing.
Agree. Looking forward to your radar, Sagar. That is next.